Early on, the British mandate over Palestine had started to run into serious trouble with a series of Muslim Arab uprisings under the leadership of Haj Amin Al-Husseini. The British had appointed this radical Islamist as Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. His appointment was an act of appeasement, a policy that the British authorities thought would restore calm. A pattern had been set that would haunt the rest of British rule over Palestine. By the mid-1930s, Palestine had become almost ungovernable. By this time, Adolf Hitler was in power and the persecution of Jews in Germany had begun. In order to appease the Mufti and his followers, in case they sided with the Nazis, which they ended up doing anyway, the British government began to introduce measures to seriously restrict Jewish immigration into Palestine. The end result was the infamous MacDonald White Paper of May 1939. This White Paper would have disastrous consequences for the Jewish people. It came at a time when Jews in Europe were fleeing from the Nazis and virtually no country would take them. The White Paper restricted the number of Jews that would be allowed to settle in Palestine to a total of just 75,000 over the next 5 years. Moreover, after that 5-year period, any further Jewish immigration would only be permitted if the Arabs agreed to it. Clause 14.1 of this White Paper also indicated that the Jewish population should not exceed 1/3 of the total population of Palestine. With a 2/3 Arab majority, many of them hostile to the Jewish presence, the political rights of the Jewish people were completely compromised.
The mandate with its sacred trust was meant to create a national home for the Jewish people and to foster their return to their sacred land. And the White Paper, the 1939 White Paper, really was a betrayal of that trust.
In that White Paper, it purported to limit the Jewish immigration to a specific number of persons per year, up to a maximum of 75,000, I believe. And thereafter, no further immigration would be permitted without the Arabs' agreement. Now, that is completely contrary to the mandate.
Great Britain does this without the support and approval of the Council of the League of Nations, does this without the support and approval of the Permanent Mandate Commission, which is overseeing their operations in Palestine.
In addition, the British government also purported to prohibit the transfer of land, further land, to any Jewish institutions. And again, that would be contrary to Article 6 of the mandate. Now, I see that that is completely illegal, and insofar as it had any effect, even the Mandates Commission agreed, on a split vote, I must admit, agreed that it was contrary to the mandate. The mandate itself didn't have direct operative effect in Palestine legislatively. It had to be supported by an order in council, which was passed by the King in Council in 1922. And Article 18 states specifically that the Palestine legislature has full powers of legislation subject to the constraints contained within the mandate. Britain specifically amended its order in council and deleted Article 18, subparagraph 2, which stated that the legislature could not enact legislation contrary to the mandate. So in effect, Britain, in the order of council, said to the Palestine government at the time, you may legislate virtually anything, even if it's contrary to the mandate. So the fact that Britain deleted that clause, 18 subparagraph 2, indicates that Britain herself recognized that she was acting contrary to the mandate.
As an international lawyer, I can say this: there's absolutely no doubt that when Great Britain decided to introduce the White Paper and make it part of the law, it violated the material obligations imposed upon it by the Mandate for Palestine. It was not only shameful, but it was wrong in law. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who could have escaped Europe, who could have survived, are stuck in Europe and end up in the death camps.
During the second half of May in 1939, a furious debate over the White Paper took place in the House of Commons. One of its fiercest opponents was Winston Churchill.
After the period of 5 years, no further immigration will be permitted unless the Arabs of Palestine are prepared to acquiesce to it. Now there is the breach. There is the violation of the pledge. There is the abandonment of the Balfour Declaration. There is the end of the vision, of the hope, of the dream.
It effectively meant the end of the Zionist experiment, because if you're going to limit the immigration, you can't have a viable state. Effectively, it was an abrogation of Britain's commitment, legal commitment, internationally legal commitment to the Jews in a Jewish state. That's what the White Paper was.
Dr. Michael Makowski is President and Chief Executive of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs in Washington, D.C. He is also the author of a biography of Winston Churchill featuring his lifelong sympathy for the Zionist cause. His book is entitled Churchill's Promised Land.
He not only led the charge against the government, but he led the charge against the government which was headed by his own party. By abrogating Britain's commitment through that White Paper to the Jews that had been there for over 20 years, Britain was demonstrating a tremendous amount of weakness. And one, it was wrong on its merits. Two, it undercut everything he built up when he was colonial secretary in the 20s. But most importantly for him was strategically, it marked a big defeat for England. He thought it would invite aggression and also dissuade potential allies of supporting England against Germany. Of course, he was right about that.
Barely 3 months after Parliament's approval of the White Paper, Britain was at war with Germany once again. A year after the White Paper, Churchill became Prime Minister of Great Britain.
When he became Prime Minister in May 1940, when Chamberlain resigned after the obvious failure of his government in confronting the Nazis, he headed a coalition government with the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party had been against the 39 White Paper. There were also a number of conservatives, like Churchill, who were against the 39 White Paper. But you had conservatives that were still trying to tighten immigration and enforce this White Paper. And he didn't like that either. So his policy was status quo. The most important issue for him was winning World War II against defeating the Nazis. That was the most important. He made that abundantly clear on at a lot of instances.
It's a tragic, tragic part of the story. As much as one must recognize the crucial role, the vital role played by the British people in helping the Zionist movement move forward, the decisions made by certain leaders in 1939 had devastating effects on many, many hundreds of thousands of Jews who could have been in Palestine instead of concentration camps.
This is the British-built detention camp at Athlete, where many thousands of so-called illegal immigrants were imprisoned. But under the terms of the Mandate, which was a binding instrument in international law, they weren't illegal at all. They had every right to be in Palestine. Instead, They were incarcerated here in conditions resonant of Nazi concentration camps in Europe. Many were even transported here in railway wagons, similar to those used by the Nazis. At least here, they were treated less inhumanely. This place was a temporary home for thousands upon thousands of Jewish refugees during the last 10 years of British rule over Palestine. Many were shipped onto other British prison camps in places such as Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean, or later, Cyprus. Another tragic aspect to this story is the fact that by the end of the war, 6 years after the 1939 White Paper, less than half of the quota of 75,000 Jews had actually been admitted to their historic homeland in Palestine. A mere 36,000 immigration certificates had been issued. Meanwhile, in Europe, at least 6 million Jews had been slaughtered by the Nazis and their collaborators. After the war, Britain did extend the 5-year term of the White Paper until the end of 1945, when the quota of 75,000 was fulfilled. But it was too little, too late. In Europe, hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, many of whom had lost all of their family members and their property, were now homeless refugees with nowhere to go.